Hello everyone, and again welcome to today's webinar entitled How to Develop Software in the Cloud Securely. I'm delighted to have two of SIA's members here to present on this topic from Grant Thornton and CloudPassage. As you may or may not know, as a best practice at SIA, we frequently bring our members together to collaborate on thought leadership, best practice activities that can help benefit our industry. And that's exactly what we hope you get from today's webinar. Before we get started, I do want to provide just a couple of housekeeping reminders. As our operator said, all phones are on mute. So to ask questions, please use the chat box on the left of your screen. I certainly encourage you to ask questions throughout the webinar. Our presenters here want to make sure you leave with the information you came here looking for. So again, feel free to ask throughout the webinar, and certainly we'll open it up at the end. Finally, if you haven't already registered for our flagship conference, All About the Cloud, taking place in May in San Francisco, I encourage you to do so this week, because on Friday we'll be launching our online conference community, which will allow you to network and meet with other attendees in advance of the conference. It's a great way to, like I said, network with potential partners and customers, and certainly, hopefully, your prospects will be in the mix. If you can see the website there on the top of the slide. If you do plan to register, send me an email. You can see my email address at the bottom of the slide. I'll be happy to provide you with a discount code off the current registration price. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our first presenter from Grant Thornton, Mitchell Simons. So Mitchell, I'll let you take it from here.
Hi everyone, how are you? And good morning. Thank you for participating in the session. What I have here is I have a few slides that I wanted to go through with you. I present many times to our clients and to an audience more in line with kind of our business, which is audit, advisory, and tax. And in my role in the advisory services, I work with companies to help them assess the risks of dealing with companies in the cloud. And so what I put together here is a subset of that presentation to give you an idea of some of the things that people ask us and some of the issues and concerns that they have as they move to a cloud-based solution. And in fact, what we're discovering is that the cloud, of course, is very popular these days, and people are moving to the cloud rapidly. But it's a different environment, and because it's so new, they don't really quite understand the risks. They may have a sense of the benefits, but not necessarily the risks. So what I have for you on this first slide, which I'll jump to now, there we go. It's something that we took from Forrester, and I use Forrester because they've come out differently than some of the others in the sense that they have a perception that the cloud is really kind of the next paradigm in terms of, if you think about mainframe, client server, and network computing in those eras. This is the next era, if you will, which is very pervasive. And if you look on the bottom left-hand corner where we talk about the different platforms, either IaaS, PaaS, or SaaS-based solutions, the one that I'm more familiar with is really in the bottom left-hand corner, which is really just hosting, which a lot of people did for a long time and never really got quite the buzz. But as you move diagonally up the curve and you look at SaaS-based solutions, what you'll discover is that all of a sudden the paradigm has shifted in terms of how you buy software, how you use software, what skills you need in the environment and in your own environment, and the impact to you from a financial standpoint in terms of moving to a cloud-based environment. And I put some examples there for you so you can kind of get an idea of what I'm talking about. Amazon, of course, is one of the more popular examples. IBM's been doing it for a long time as well. And then you kind of go down the curve to some other solutions like SuccessFactors, Workday, and E2Open. Salesforce, of course, is one of the more popular examples. So from that standpoint, I think everybody sort of understands they have new things that they can buy, new things that they can use, and depending upon your level of sophistication and the kind of software you're trying to deploy, you kind of move from left to right in terms of how much software and computing power you want to actually use. Some of the other concepts too that I didn't have on the slide here, but also impact you is this concept of elasticity, where you basically only pay for what you use, which is something that everyone's been trying to adapt to for a long time. I worked at IBM before I was at Grant Thornton, and we had this concept of turning processors on and off and then charging the client for the use of computing power as they needed, and it would scale up and scale down. I don't think that really worked. I don't think they were able to really kind of figure out how to bill a client for that. But I think in today's world, we're getting a lot closer to getting that done. And then this other concept called cloud bursting, where the service provider, the cloud provider, is able to scale with you and with all their other clients as they need to when your either user counts or services jump as well. So some other concepts that are coming into the vernacular now in terms of what we can use and what we can't use. So that's that's most of the concepts there. You'll also see in there public cloud versus private cloud, and that's important too because that's the level of sophistication with the software that we're getting today. Before, it was just a private cloud or point-to-point kind of a solution, and then it moves up to a public cloud solution, which is also much more complex and much more flexible in terms of what you can get. And so a lot of companies are doing both. They're taking some applications and adapting them to a private cloud solution. In others where it's not so important, then they take advantage of the public cloud, and we'll go over some of what that means going forward in terms of risks and how you're going to use the solution going forward. So anyways, that's Forrester and kind of their mindset. Let me go to the next slide. And I think, there we go. So potential benefits. All right. So some of the ideas here that I wanted to cover with you focus on these 4 different areas: interoperability across the platform, the way you're using resources and costs, speed the market, what does that mean, and then of course the financial benefits. I think basically what we're talking about here is that the applications, you're getting this ability to go from application to application and find basically the best of breed solution and deploy it. And before, that wasn't always possible. Before, you would buy a vendor-based solution, and that's what you would get. And some parts of the applications worked well, and some didn't. And because of that, you basically had kind of an evening out of what worked and what didn't work. So here, it's a little bit more flexible. You also are working with more generic solutions as well. But cost-effective, higher utilization of resources, what that's trying to get to is that basically with a cloud-based solution, the companies are starting to compromise in terms of what they're looking for. They're able to compromise on, I don't need the most customized application anymore. I'm going to assume the application does what I need it to do, and I need to configure it. So you hear more of configuration as opposed to customization. And if you're able to do that, then that's great. Of course, the risk is that it doesn't meet your needs for a particular industry. So it does help you in terms of scaling. It does help you in terms of allocating resources to what you need to get done. But at the same time, it's not necessarily meeting all of your needs. But then think about it on the technology standpoint. You don't need as many resources that are that complex from a technology standpoint because you move that off to the cloud. So in some respects, you're changing the mix of your pool of resources in your company. Speed the market, of course, that's great because what you're saying is you're going to deploy these solutions a lot quicker, and what we're also saying is that there's substantially less risk because a lot of companies are using this, and we're telling in your particular case for your specific company, you're saying, I'm going to change the way I operate my processes to meet the requirements of the software. Okay, and then finally, financial benefits. The biggest difference, obviously, is that it's an off-balance sheet item. You're not capitalizing this. You're not capitalizing the software, the hardware, and the implementation effort in the sense that you were doing it traditionally. Now you're basically paying by the month. You may be committing yourself to several months of payments, but at least you don't have this upfront investment, and you're starting to just pay for the services you need it, as opposed to taking on this huge risk that the software is going to work for you, and you're not necessarily going to implement it over the next year or 2 years. So that seems to be the biggest difference. Anyway, so that covers the benefits for the most part, the major benefits. The other thing to think about this too is, at least from what we see, the smaller the company, the more adept they are and the more interested they are to a cloud-based solution. So I talk to a lot of companies these days that are either a startup or they're just growing. They're growing fast, but they're relatively small on the scale. So you see a lot of companies adapting to the cloud based on just their ability to absorb that kind of technology. And then as they get bigger, then I see point-to-point solutions emerging out of the larger companies, only because the departments or divisions are just frustrated that they can't get what they need in the corporate environment, corporate IT environment, and so they move to something in the cloud just so they can get stuff done. Salesforce.com did a great job of expanding rapidly in those environments just because companies needed to get some new functionality and no one was there to help them. Okay, and I'm going pretty fast, but hopefully this all makes sense. So on potential risks, and I could spend a long time talking about this, but I'm just going to highlight a few of the points, and I've got one more slide that I want to cover that will give you a better idea of that. But what are the physical components of the clouds? Where is the data? How is it protected? And what's the tone at the top? In other words, what's management saying? But there's a lot to consider. And I think a lot of people, and I know for the chief audit executives that we talk to around the country, they are more focused on managing risk within their company, and they don't think about it as much for cloud-based solutions, which is kind of surprising because that's primarily where their data is. So there's an assumption, I think, a false assumption that the data is safe or secure because it's being handled by a third party. But however you look at it, you need to actually spend some time understanding the third party and how they're managing your data and where the data is, just by asking some of those simple questions. So you need to really know where it is. You are moving that technology away from you, so you're not necessarily thinking about the circuits or the lines, routers, firewalls, all that stuff. So you need to ask the question as to, well, who is watching all that stuff? And of course, business recovery or disaster recovery in your own particular environment, how long is it going to take for you to recover? And how long can you be down before it impacts your business? And everyone I talk to, every company I go to has a different number. Some say they can't be down, and some say they can be down for a week. And what you have to do is you kind of have to match that up with the company that you're partnering with to find out how they will be able to support you. And remember, if they go down, it's not just you that goes down, it's everybody in that environment. So they're trying to deal with a lot of customers at the same time that all have different needs and requirements. So you see there's lots of questions you can ask. The SSAE 16 requirements or the next generation of SAS 70 kind of environment that you probably have heard about before. And that's our way of going out to these data centers and finding out just how prepared they are to support you in the event of a disaster. And then I think actually that covers a lot of this slide. Archives and data backup, again, another question to ask, and some questions that some of our clients need to ask that we've been running into them. But as you go to these different providers and you're asking them for help in terms of an ERP or point-to-point solution, the one question you need to ask is, what about the data, and can I get it? Because if you ever change from one solution to the next, let's say you change from one CRM solution to the next, can you even get that data? And in some cases you can't. And if you could get it, can you translate it for the new solution? And in some cases you can't. So being able to archive that information and back it up and make sure that does get done and be able to recover it is one thing. But if you do end up switching providers, what kind of impact does that have on you as an organization? Okay, and I got some more things I want to cover as well in the next slide, so I'm going to move on to the next and go through that with you. Okay, so 6 additional risk areas, and I'm going to go through this and walk you through it. And basically this is sort of your question list, if you will, as you're wondering about how to deal in a cloud-based environment. And I'll just give you some ideas of some of the issues and risks that we run into that you may find important for you as well. So security, which you have to, obviously, and we're going to talk about this a lot in a little bit as soon as I'm done, but you just kind of need to know in many ways how is your data secured, and not just from a system standpoint or a network standpoint, but just physically. Where is your data, where is it located, and what kind of security is deployed at that location. And a lot of times, when we do our SSAE 16 reviews, it starts in that box for the most part and kind of focuses on that. There's some other areas here that we touch on, but the one that's most obvious is we actually go to the data center, we walk around, we look, and we watch what people are doing, and we try and understand how secure is this location, and what are they doing to make sure that that security is in place. Multi-tenancy, and this is one of the big changes in terms of going to a cloud-based solution, is, and what basically what we're talking about there is, we have one server, but you have multiple clients on that one server. That hasn't been done before in the past. Basically every time you went to a location or a data center, you rented space effectively, and you'd put your servers in there, and that server was yours. And what most of those guys would do is they'd bounce the server for you for the most part, but that was it. And in this case, in a cloud-based solution, there could be hundreds or thousands of clients on one server using a set of data servers where your data is mixed in with everybody else's. So the question is, how is that segregation done, and how are you assured that that vendor doesn't lose your data? And again, Amazon was a great example back a year or so ago when they couldn't answer that question for you. So anytime they're sharing servers, that it could end up being a conflict for you, basically just because of your own environment that you work with, or federal state regulations that may restrict you from doing that. So you need to understand that. And of course, data location, where is your data, and how is it stored in the system? And again, this is mostly a legal issue in many cases. Depending upon your company and your environment and your industry, there's a lot of rules and regulations that dictate how your data is stored, and whether it's stored internationally or within the U.S. Of course, in the UK, it goes the other way, where there's certain companies you deal with in the UK where they can't outsource to a U.S. provider because they can't have their data leave the country. And in some cases, it works in the reverse as well. So the data location is a question that you need to ask, and in some cases, it may impact you. And and obviously, as that cloud provider becomes more sophisticated and becomes more international, your data could be all over the place. Reliability, that speaks to performance primarily. So just this whole discussion of business continuity and recovery falls in that realm. So you kind of have to understand what would happen in the case of a location or a system going down, and how they would recover, and if that recovery falls within your operating requirements, or basically your SLA requirements. Sustainability addresses the issue of who is this vendor, and just their ability to stay in business. So what happens if they do go out of business, and how would you deal in a recovery issue in that case? How would you get access to your data, and how would you be able to migrate it and mobilize it to another location? So just something to consider, question to ask and understand. And then finally, scalability, which of course is very important. As you grow, you want to be kind of assured that the system will grow with you, that the capacity of their servers and locations will support you and provide you with the response time that you're looking for. So if that happens where they can't scale and you need to move off of them into another cloud provider, again, that question comes up of, can you get the data? You know, is that even possible? So you need to basically understand that and make sure that that's something that's going to happen for you. Okay, so anyways, that really covers my topics, if you will, and if you have any questions about that, just let us know, and I can go back and cover some of the more details. But that's basically the areas that I was going to cover.
Great, thanks, Mitchell. Now we're going to turn it over to Rand Wacker from CloudPassage, and I know Rand's going to share his screen with us. Mitchell?
Great, thank you very much, Rihanna. Hello, everyone. Rand Wacker from CloudPassage. Thank you very much for joining us today. I'd also like to thank SIAA and our co-presenters from Grant Thornton, and also to thank all of you. We've seen a lot of Twitter buzz leading up to this webinar, which is exciting. We've seen a lot of Twitter buzz over our Series B funding announcement this morning, so really looking forward to the webinar. What I wanted to do was to really build on Mitchell's slides and offer some practical advice for how to build and secure web services in today's public cloud environment. Mitchell did a really good job of describing the landscape, talking about the business benefits of delivering software services from the cloud as an example, and also some of the risks. And we know in every survey that I've ever seen about cloud adoption has called out security as being the single biggest impediment to adopting cloud and moving services into the cloud. And so I wanted to talk to you today at a real practical level about what people are concerned about and some of the things that you can do in order to really address those issues so that you can move to the cloud in order to enable your business. So, talking really quickly about what ISVs such as yourselves may use the cloud for, we see a number of use cases. It's not just actually running a website there. Usually what happens is that the first time a company that's developing software finds themselves in the cloud is when a developer or someone on the IT team spins up a server in order to solve a problem that they have to get their job done, where it would have taken too long to necessarily provision a server in a traditional data center. And so the speed and the low cost of spinning up a server one at a time, two at a time, really is appealing to people who are focused on solving a problem they have right then. And I'd actually suggest that you all go and check your expense reports to see if folks may be expensing cloud servers that you may not even know about. The risk, of course, here is that if people are using these public cloud servers in order to do development on your core products, that means your intellectual property, your code, is out live on the internet, and that you have risks of losing that as well as losing possibly your customers' data. The second use case is around actually hosting an application in the cloud. So for all the reasons that Mitchell called out around scalability, elasticity, tying cost to growth, all of that, hosting and building software as a service offerings from an infrastructure as a service public cloud is really appealing. And there are risks with that, obviously, just like there are risks of building your own website and hosting your own data center. To cut to the chase, it is absolutely possible to build a secure and regulatory compliant cloud service in a public cloud environment. You just have to look at things a little bit differently than we would in a private data center or something like that. And the last use case that many of you may also already be doing is using the cloud to push large temporary workloads out, such as a big data analysis or doing some number crunching for your customers. The ability to spin up hundreds of servers on demand and then turn them off when you don't need them and not have that sunk capital cost is extremely appealing. Again, your risks are losing your intellectual property, your customer data, all those things. So for all those reasons, the challenge, what you're really trying to do is to move your software offerings to the cloud, to build new services in the cloud, and you really want to deliver SaaS from an infrastructure as a service play. So you want to build the next Salesforce, the next Twitter, the next Facebook, and you want to build it on top of a infrastructure as a service where you can lease those servers at a much lower cost and a much cheaper entry point than building the systems yourselves. Instagram is a good example. They got bought for $1 billion yesterday. They didn't buy a single server. They leased everything out of Amazon to build that business. So when you look at the cloud, as Mitchell had said very specifically, the potential benefits that he went over were the costs and the agility, and the cloud matches to that very, very closely. The challenge you have, as an IT professional is figuring out how are you going to manage your risk. Regardless if you're in the cloud or not, you care about legal and regulatory compliance, you care about business continuity and making sure things stay running, and you care about brand protection. And so the business goals you have don't change just because you're in the cloud, and so you have to figure out how to do these things even when your servers are running in someone else's data centers. So let me talk very quickly about a little bit more detail why the cloud is so beneficial for these kinds of SaaS offerings. A little bit more detail on what Mitchell was talking about, but infrastructure as a service and public cloud computing is incredibly dynamic. The ability to use only what you need and pay only for what you use is extremely beneficial. You can scale up servers as needed. You can cut servers back. You can even move servers to a different provider if they have better reliability, better geographic proximity to your customers, or if they have better costs. And so that's one of the appealing things about running a service in a public cloud environment. The other thing that people I think are just starting now to broadly realize is that the infrastructure as a service model can radically change the way you operationalize your service. Traditional IT operations would have long-lived servers running in data centers and either physical or virtual systems that would basically be installed and run for the useful life of that system. In the cloud, since you have zero physical server overhead, it's very, very easy to spin up new servers and to remove those servers and to just recreate a new server from what's commonly called a gold master image. So this is not necessarily the way you have to do things in the cloud, but it is one of the ways that you'll hear some of the most forward-thinking cloud companies going. For example, Netflix, which is a very cloud-forward company, has been quite open about their approach to what's called DevOps and NoOps and their operational model where, for example, the average life of a server in Netflix Cloud is 6 days. It'll be less than a week between when a server is created and when that it's actually destroyed and then updated with a new image from an updated gold master. And so the differences there is that you no longer have the need to go in and manually patch servers. Instead, you're just recloning them. And you need to look at servers very, very differently in that they're all simply very identical clones of the other. So for this and many other reasons, the security challenges in the cloud are quite substantial. And it's not necessarily because of the operational model, It's because traditional security products were not designed to handle this dynamic operational model. Additionally, traditional data center security tools that relied on access to the network to provide security simply don't work in the cloud because you don't have access to that network, or you don't have access to the hypervisor in which your servers are running. So if you've built, for example, a private cloud or a private virtualization data center using VMware or Xen or anything internally, you may have instrumented some of your hypervisors with security and other tools for management, but the problem with trying to move those servers to a public cloud environment is that in Amazon, in Rackspace, in all these different providers, you do not have access to that hypervisor. So one of the things that I'll get to at the end of the slides is that when you're designing your public cloud operational model, build it for the least common denominator. Build it assuming that you won't have access to the network of the hypervisors. Build it to assume you won't even have access to specialized services offered by some of the providers, so that you're able to remain dynamic and take advantage of lower costs from various providers as you're moving your services around. So delivering software as a service from the cloud, what really do you have to be worried about from a security perspective? I'll start with a little bit of detail from how many people today are securing their cloud servers. And this is based on a survey that we've ran amongst hundreds of IT professionals who are running in the cloud and asking what they're doing. You know, most disturbingly, a large portion of them said that they're not securing their cloud servers. And I really question the business decisions behind that, because if we had asked, what are you doing to secure your website that you're hosting from your private data center, I'm sure that they would say that they have firewalls and network defenses and even host security on those servers to protect those servers. So the fact that there's enough people that are saying they're not securing their cloud servers is worrisome enough, but the reason is that in many cases they've jumped to the public cloud and they don't have options on how to secure those servers. The other part that's interesting, and I'll talk about a little bit this in the next slide, is that a large portion of people are saying, my provider does it for me. That's a little bit of a fallacy, as I'll show, because in truth, in the cloud, it is actually your responsibility as the end customer to secure your servers. And all the providers are actually very clear about that. The people who are using some of the open source tool or manual processes or those things, they're ahead of the curve. But in reality, what's needed is a new architecture and a new set of tools in order to do cloud security in a way that works in this highly dynamic environment. So I mentioned responsibility, and I mentioned what the providers will say specifically about whose responsibility it is to secure servers in the cloud. This is a passage taken directly from Amazon's overview of their security practices and their specific statements. They are very clear, and every other provider is very, very clear, that they take responsibility for the physical facilities, the network and storage, and the hypervisor your servers are running in. But your virtual machine and the operating system, the applications, and the data running on that virtual machine are wholly your responsibility. And so they will recommend the addition of host-based firewalls, host-based intrusion detection, all these tools that you would run in a private data center anyways, but unfortunately, until recently, have been very hard to run in the cloud. And so knowing that these are your responsibilities, we're really focused today on helping you understand what you can do to secure your cloud applications. Because no matter where you are, either in a private data center or a public cloud, server security is your responsibility. So as C-level executives who are trying to launch services in the SaaS space, keep in mind your high-level business drivers, regulatory compliance, business continuity, brand management, all those different things go into planning your security deployment. And whether you're running in a private data center that you control or in the public cloud, you need to architect your solution to provide the traditional security capabilities of perimeter and access control, server integrity, intrusion detection, all these kinds of things. And so I hope to explain a little bit more about the details of how those things do work in the cloud and what you can do to make your system safe. So let's talk a little bit technically, get a little bit into detail about firewalling in the cloud and talk about why it's so different than in a traditional private data center. In a traditional private data center, you usually have not just one, but multiple layers of firewalls and perimeter defenses that are protecting internet-facing services from core data hosting and application hosting services internally. And the reason for this very often is that it is a fact of life that servers get out of date, they have patches that have remote exposures, that things go wrong and servers can become vulnerable. And so in this environment, a dual-layer firewall would prevent an attacker from compromising, say, one of your front-end web servers, then being able to get into the real core data that's hosted within your environment. And so this is a traditional, very, very common layout in a private data center. If you move that to the cloud, then you are taking away that double layer of protection, and now all of your servers are essentially running open out in the public cloud unless you do something to secure them. And so if this happens, for example, it is well known that there are attackers out there scanning public cloud servers in order to compromise them and either steal the data, steal the code, do something to damage the business, or simply to use those servers for further attacks that they want to run. We know, for example, and this has been documented in the press, that many of the Sony breaches that made so many headlines last year were launched from Amazon EC2. And so we know that there are attacks happening inside these public clouds, and we know that people running, and that we know that there are attacks coming from these public clouds. So what you need to do is that you need to, first and foremost, firewall your servers in the cloud. This is something that you can do with host-based firewalls on the servers themselves. Some of the cloud providers offer firewall functionality, although it's somewhat limited with what you'd find in a traditional data center. There are also commercial products. Ours is one of them that will help you automate the management of these firewalls and automate the connectivity between your servers in case so that you can take advantage of the dynamic nature of the cloud but still remain secure. What I mean by that is that say you have, for example, a traditional three-tier architecture, load balancers, app servers, and database servers, and you've configured the firewalls on those systems to only allow each server type to talk to the other type that's important. One of the reasons you've moved to the cloud is you want the dynamic ability to build out new servers and extend your capacity. And so if, for example, you were going to create a new app server, you would have to definitely tell the load balancers about that server and tell the database servers about that server from the firewall perspective. As you add more and more servers of different types, this becomes an exponential problem and becomes quite a large management challenge. It's possible to script with some tools that are out there, but we highly recommend the deployment of a real package that can automate this for you. Because what's also really important is that even if you did this manually when you're building servers out, if a server goes away and those firewall ports are left open, you're actually just as exposed as you were previously without any firewalls, because it's not uncommon for Amazon to recycle an IP address in less than 5 minutes and for attackers to take that space and to immediately scan servers around them looking for open compromises. So from the firewalling perspective, you really need to focus on using what other firewall options you have, make sure that they are updated very, very quickly, and plan for the future, because something I didn't get into but is important for you to consider is that eventually you will be multi-cloud. You will run in multiple cloud regions, you will run across multiple cloud providers, and you will probably also run both in public and private clouds, and you need to connect those. So whatever you're going to do to solve these problems, make sure that it supports all these different models. Moving really quickly, I want to talk about securing the servers themselves beyond the firewalling and the outside protection. In a traditional data center, capacity is mostly static. I touched on this before, where you build your servers, they're very long-lived, and even if a server gets out of spec with regards to patches and security configurations, your risk is mitigated by those perimeter defenses. In the cloud, your capacity is highly dynamic. This is why you've moved there. You want to be able to take advantage of this. And it's also true that servers are very short-lived. You'll scale up to handle a spike, and then when that spike's over, you'll scale back in order to save on your hourly charges. So the problem is that if a gold master image becomes out of date due to a patch, every image that's been cloned from that gold master will be basically vulnerable as well. So what happens, and this goes back to the Netflix model, for example, Netflix doesn't patch individual servers. What they do is that they patch their gold master, and then they spin up new servers that basically replace the old servers with that new model. So at that point, you are incrementally but constantly updating your servers with the most common patches. Many other things you need to do to secure your cloud, your servers in a dynamic cloud, and these are things that you would always do in your private data center, but are just challenging to do in the public cloud until you find a tool that can help you, is that you definitely want to focus on managing the OS configurations and the application configurations so that if a developer comes in, for example, and makes a change for debugging purposes, that doesn't persist and leave your servers exposed. You want to make sure that all your software packages are up to date. You want an easy way to inventory what's installed on what servers, so if a remote exploit comes out, as for example, Microsoft announced about their remote desktop protocol a few weeks ago, you want to know exactly what servers are vulnerable so that you can lock them down and then immediately go and patch them. And then you also want to monitor not just the application and OS code, but you want to monitor your own applications. You want to be installing intrusion detection systems and file integrity monitoring systems that will look for subtle changes in your code which could indicate tampering either by an intruder or possibly accidentally by someone who works for you. And most importantly, because of the highly automated nature of the cloud, you must automate these things to remain secure as your servers are essentially building themselves out. So embrace the flexibility of the cloud, rethink the way you're doing your operations, be sure to secure your server integrity by keeping those images up to date and looking for changes. Any server that's different from all the other servers in their server group is definitely something you need to look at. And it's absolutely possible to meet regulatory compliance in the cloud. You just need to know which pieces of it you're responsible for. So wrapping up, and then we'll move to Q&A. From a consideration perspective, really understand what your cloud providers take responsibility for and what they don't and what you're on the hook for. Plan for multi-cloud availability. Design your system. There's an old adage that said that if you know you're going to go cloud, then start with the public cloud and solve those problems first. Even if you're only going to run in the private cloud, at least by understanding how to run things in a true infrastructure as a service model, then you won't be tied to any hypervisor or network-based security, and you can easily burst out or go hybrid. Also take into consideration the least common denominator of services that your providers might have, and, for example, try to avoid getting locked into any specific services at a specific provider, which would prevent you from taking advantage of better cost or better reliability from another provider. And then, finally, really understand and embrace this new operational model and figure out how to build security into that, using tools like ours, using tools like other open source systems out there if you can take the time to build those. But at the end, really focus on doing safe SaaS in the cloud, focus on securing those servers in a highly automated and self-defending way, look at firewalling and access control, configuration package security, make sure you know the server accounts, who's on there, work with the server compromise and intrusion alerting tools that you can, keep doing all the forensics and analytics you do in your own private data center, but then also be sure to really focus on the integration and automation capabilities that the cloud provides. So I want to thank everyone very much for their time, and I'll turn it back to Rihanna right now and open it up for Q&A.
Thanks, Rand, and thanks, Mitchell. I want to remind the audience that if you have any questions, please use the chat box on the left of your screen, and I know the gentleman will be happy to answer them. I certainly have a couple of my own. Mitchell, you talked a little bit about how important it is to make sure you are prepared in case your cloud provider goes down or there's an outage. How important is this new idea of trust sites? You see companies like Salesforce.com, Delboomi, they've all built these trust sites that show their uptime, their downtime, completely transparent. How important is that if you're looking for a cloud provider that they provide that information? And then how important is it if you are a cloud provider, maybe a smaller cloud provider, to provide that information to your customers?
Yeah, I mean, all that's very important, but the differences between each company and their location and the business that they're in and the software that they're trying to use makes it unique to them. So as they look at their own environment, they basically have to look at the providers to figure out which one will meet those requirements for them the best, as far as they know. And a lot of it depends on the solution that they're using. You'll see that the cloud providers are not generic. They're mostly tied to particular applications and functions, and that's normally what my clients are doing. They're figuring out who's best in that particular area of expertise, and then they sort of gravitate towards them.
Great. Rand, do you have anything to add?
No, I think Mitchell answered it well.
Great. I see a hand raised. Can you please type your question out? I'm sorry. Yes, the presentation materials will be available. We'll send out the recording and the slides to the attendees following the wrap-up of the webinar. Another question. Can you talk a little bit about what you've seen companies do to manage the integration issues associated with using multiple cloud-based solutions?
Yeah, that's a big issue. I had one client that I was out to where they had 9 different cloud-based solutions that they were using, and we got involved because they couldn't close their books, or they couldn't do it on a timely basis because the data was everywhere. And so you have to be a little bit concerned about that. You have to kind of think through that issue, because as you go to each solution, individually they're all great, but then as you adopt to all of them, you do have this integration issue that your data is all over the place. So a lot of times, what you're left to do is basically build a data warehouse and use that as a means to one, get the most important pieces of your data, and that also provides you a way of doing another way of backup and retention, if you will, and recovery. But then you're also able to do the analysis you need from all these different data sources so you can combine them and use them going forward.
Great. I do see we have another.
Grant Wecker. I might have,
yeah, go ahead.
To add on to that. I think the finding where all your data is really critical. Also, from an operational perspective, one thing that we've seen is that because the cloud model doesn't rely on any physical servers to be procured or any legacy systems to be provisioned, many people are taking advantage of the APIs and the ability to integrate your operational systems across cloud providers and across services that you're using, and building new tools on top of that. And so if you look at some of the provisioning and management tools out there like Chef and Puppet and RightScale, and then the systems that plug into the providers and the orchestration tools out there, it's very impressive what people are able to do with some of these quote-unquote DevOps style management systems and NoOps style management systems to fully automate what has traditionally been a very manual and physical process of data center deployments.
Great. And I'm seeing a question come in from a computer engineering student in France, and the question's around network security and data security in the cloud. How are the data secured with encryption, and what is some intelligence that we can use so that the data that only we want access can be decrypted?
Is that a Rand question, or?
Sure, I'll happily work on that one. So one of the things that I definitely want to try to get across is that the responsibility and the capabilities in the cloud are actually very similar to if you're running your own data centers or running in a co-location facility. So the same way that you would do any type of encryption on servers that you're managing directly can also be applied in the cloud. Now you have to consider key management and where that goes, and there's a lot of tools out there that can help you manage on-premise keys with in-cloud data. But that's only one piece of the security solution. You really need to consider not just the data and where that's living, but you need to consider that once it's unencrypted and in use for processing, for example, in the cloud, the security of their servers and the security applications on top of those. So again, going back to the operational differences, the operational models are different in the cloud, but the responsibilities and your capabilities in the cloud are similar to the private data center, and there are several tools out there that work for that.
So Rand, given all the security measures that we certainly want to take into consideration, how long should it take a privately hosted web application to move into cloud hosting?
That's a great question, and I think that it really depends on whether or not you're trying to move a legacy application into the cloud, or if you're trying to build a new application in the cloud directly. And the reason I say that is that in many cases there are tools out there to help accelerate development of new applications that can get you up and running with a cloud service, very, very quickly. Traditional systems can also be moved to the cloud actually quite easily, but they're not going to benefit from the operational changes, efficiencies. And so, for example, if your goal is to move to the cloud in order to take advantage of the scalability, if you have to re-architect your application in order to be more dynamic like that, then that's going to be the long pole in your transition. But it is very possible, again, once you've determined the least common denominator operating environment and you've done what you need to secure that appropriately, you can easily take virtual instances from a private data center and throw them up in the cloud and run them there in the traditional operation model.
Great. We have a few minutes left. Maybe each of you could just take a moment and summarize the key risks in moving to cloud-based solutions and also how you would mitigate these risks. Mitchell, you want to go first?
Sure. I guess to summarize, the one thing to just take in as an understanding is that, and I talked about a little bit in the slides, that what the vendors are doing is they're basically owning the application, and they will make updates to the application as they deem so to do that. And that's the key point to remember. Before, in the legacy world, you would deploy the application and you would update it as you wanted to, as you thought you needed to make changes. Here, the vendor's making changes all the time, maybe once or twice a year. And so your application and your ability to use the system is going to continue to evolve and change and impact your organization. So while you think about these applications and you decide to move to a cloud-based solution, how it impacts your business is a lot different than what you've seen in the past. And so it impacts the people, it impacts your ability to process transactions in the system and change management aspects. So if you have an organization where they're finding it difficult to adapt to changes, you need to think about this in terms of how you use the cloud and how it's going to affect you.
Great, thanks. Rand, you want to take that one?
Sure. I think people want some takeaways from this presentation. First of all, definitely realize that whether you know it or not, you probably have some portion of your company in the cloud. And I encourage you to check with your developers and check with folks who may be doing things outside of IT that have already put you in the cloud to some degree. When that happens, you need to really understand what the provider is responsible for from a security perspective and what your responsibility is and how you're going to mitigate that risk. And then I encourage you to take the opportunity to turn those cloud risks into benefits and opportunities for your company. Specifically, figure out how to recraft your internal systems so that you can automate more and you can take advantage of that automation platform that the cloud really is. Figure out how you can take these cost efficiencies of running in the cloud and maybe refactor some of those costs into higher level business functions, and really figure out how you can take the agileness that the cloud allows you to have and then turn that into a business opportunity for yourself to increase the pace at which you can deliver new products to your customers.
That's great. Well, we're approaching the top of the hour. I want to thank both Rand and Mitchell for their time today and thank our audience. If you do have any additional questions, please feel free to send them our way. We'll make sure they get directly to the gentleman and you'll get a response. And also just a reminder that the slides and the recording of the presentation will be available, and we'll send you the appropriate links shortly after the conclusion of today's webinar. So with that, I want to thank everyone and wish everyone a good rest of the week. Thank you.